Hey everyone, welcome to Future Forward. I'm Rowan, and with me as always is my incredibly curious co-host Alex.
Hi, everyone. I'm already excited about today's topic. I was actually thinking about this on my way to the studio. When did German streets start looking so different?
You know, it's fascinating you mentioned that. Just 5 years ago, seeing a Chinese car on German roads was like spotting a unicorn. Now, they're everywhere.
I actually saw 3 MGs just this morning. That would have been unthinkable not too long ago.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking at how Chinese automotive companies are completely reshaping Europe's car industry. The numbers are pretty remarkable. BYD alone has seen a 200% sales increase just this year.
200%? That's huge. And isn't there something happening with Volkswagen plants too?
There absolutely is. We'll get into that whole story, plus we'll look at how Chinese manufacturers are leading the electric revolution, changing consumer perceptions, and maybe even rewriting the rules of the European auto industry.
Sounds like we've got quite a journey ahead. I'm particularly interested in how traditional German brands are responding to all this.
Because this is the story of how the automotive landscape of Europe is being transformed right before our eyes. Let's dive into these numbers because they tell an incredible story. Well, just 3 years ago, they made up less than 0.2% of all cars in Germany.
That's tiny, like practically non-existent.
Exactly, but now let me paint you a picture of where we are today. MG Rowan, the brand you spotted this morning, they've got 49,557 vehicles on German roads alone.
Wow. And they're just one brand, right? There must be others making waves too.
Absolutely. We've got Link, Great Wall Motor, and of course BYD, which brings us back to that 200% growth figure. But what's really fascinating is how they've managed this transformation.
I'm guessing competitive pricing has something to do with it?
That's part of it, but there's something even more interesting at play. These companies aren't just competing on price. They're actually leading in electric vehicle technology. They've got incredibly sophisticated battery tech and really well-integrated supply chains.
That's surprising. I think most people still think of German engineering as being, the gold standard.
You'd think so. But Chinese manufacturers have been quietly building up their expertise for years. Take BYD, for instance. They were making batteries long before they started making cars, which gave them a huge advantage when electric vehicles started taking off.
So they're not just copying existing technology, they're actually innovating?
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting. Remember how we mentioned MG's numbers? Well, they didn't achieve that just by being cheaper. They've actually positioned themselves as a premium tech brand, but at a more accessible price point.
That's clever, sort of like what Japanese brands did back in the day.
That's a brilliant comparison. Just like Toyota and Honda did in the 1970s and 80s, Chinese brands are challenging perceptions about quality and innovation. But they're doing it much faster thanks to the electric vehicle revolution.
But surely they must be facing some challenges? I mean, breaking into a market dominated by brands like BMW and Mercedes can't be easy.
Oh, absolutely. They've had to overcome huge hurdles with consumer perception, getting their service network set up, and meeting all the European regulatory requirements. But here's something fascinating. They're turning those challenges into opportunities.
How so?
Well, take service networks, for example. Instead of building traditional dealerships, many Chinese brands are experimenting with digital-first approaches. They're setting up experience centers in shopping malls, offering direct-to-consumer sales, completely rethinking how cars are sold and serviced.
That sounds pretty revolutionary. But I can't help wondering how the traditional German manufacturers are feeling about all this.
It's causing quite a stir, I can tell you that. The German auto industry employs hundreds of thousands of people, and there's genuine concern about what this shift means for jobs and the future of their industry.
Especially with that Volkswagen plant situation you mentioned earlier.
Exactly, and that brings us to a really crucial point about this whole transformation. It's not just about selling cars anymore. It's about fundamentally reshaping how the entire industry operates.
You know what's really striking to me? How quickly all this has happened. I mean, going from practically zero to being a major player in just a few years, that's pretty incredible.
And that speed is exactly what's caught many traditional manufacturers off guard. They're used to gradual evolution, not this kind of rapid transformation. It's like the industry has shifted into a completely different gear.
Speaking of shifting gears, there's another layer to this story that really explains why Chinese manufacturers have gained such an advantage. It all comes down to batteries. And this is where things get really interesting.
The heart of every electric vehicle? I'm guessing China has some kind of edge here?
They don't just have an edge, they've practically cornered the market. You see, while traditional automakers were perfecting combustion engines, Chinese companies were pouring billions into battery technology and production.
So they were playing the long game?
Exactly. And now it's paying off in a big way. Let me paint a picture of what this means. Chinese manufacturers control nearly every step of the battery production process, from raw materials to final assembly. It's like they're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
What makes their batteries so special? I mean, a battery is a battery, right?
Oh, that's where you'd be surprised. Chinese companies have made huge breakthroughs in battery chemistry. They've developed ways to make batteries that are not just cheaper, but also more energy dense. That means more range, faster charging, and better performance.
Wait, so they're actually ahead of European manufacturers in battery tech? That's not what most people would expect.
It's pretty eye-opening, isn't it? Take BYD, for example. They've developed something called blade battery technology. It's safer, more stable, and more efficient than many competitors. And because they control the entire supply chain, they can produce it at a significantly lower cost.
I'm curious about something. We always hear about rare earth materials being crucial for batteries. Does China have an advantage there too?
That's a really insightful question. China processes about 80% of the world's rare earth materials. But it's not just about having the materials. It's about knowing how to process them efficiently.
They've basically created a complete ecosystem?
Precisely. Think of it like a massive industrial orchestra where China conducts every section. They've got the raw materials, the processing facilities, the manufacturing expertise, and now they're bringing all that knowledge to Europe.
But surely European manufacturers can catch up. They've got plenty of resources and expertise.
Well, that's where things get complicated. European manufacturers are trying to build their own battery production facilities, but they're starting from way behind. It's like trying to build a smartphone company today and compete with Apple or Samsung.
That must be pretty frustrating for traditional European brands.
You know what's even more interesting? Some European manufacturers are actually starting to use Chinese batteries in their vehicles. They've realized it's more cost-effective than trying to develop everything from scratch.
No way. That's got to be a tough pill to swallow for companies that pride themselves on their engineering.
It definitely is. But here's the thing. The battery technology gap isn't just about engineering anymore. It's about scale, efficiency, and years of focused development. Chinese manufacturers have spent over a decade building this advantage.
I guess that explains why they can offer electric vehicles at such competitive prices while still maintaining good performance.
Absolutely. And there's another fascinating aspect to this. Chinese manufacturers are already working on the next generation of battery technology. They're developing solid-state batteries, sodium-ion batteries, technologies that could make electric vehicles even more accessible.
That sounds like they're not just winning the current race, they're already planning for the next one.
Exactly. And that's what makes this transformation of the European auto market so significant. It's not just about selling cars. It's about fundamentally changing how we think about automotive technology and innovation.
You know, when you put it all together like this, it really shows how this shift in the market isn't just some temporary trend.
No, it's definitely not. What we're witnessing is a complete realignment of the automotive industry's center of gravity, and battery technology is the foundation that's making it all possible. You know, while we're talking about these massive shifts in the industry, there's one development that really captures just how dramatic this change is. Cherry, a Chinese automaker, is in talks to acquire 2 Volkswagen plants.
Hold on. Volkswagen is selling their plants? That seems huge.
It really is. Think about this for a moment. Volkswagen, the company that literally defined German auto manufacturing, is considering selling actual production facilities to a Chinese competitor. This isn't just entering the market anymore. This is setting up shop right in the heart of German car country.
That's quite something. But why would Volkswagen consider this?
Well, it's fascinating, actually. These plants were originally dedicated to producing internal combustion engine vehicles. As Volkswagen shifts towards electric vehicles, they're finding themselves with excess capacity in their traditional manufacturing facilities.
So it's part of their transition to electric vehicles?
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting. For Chery, this isn't just about buying buildings and equipment. They're looking to acquire something far more valuable, decades of German manufacturing expertise built into the workforce.
The workers would stay with the plants?
That's the plan. And it's pretty clever when you think about it. Instead of building everything from scratch, they get instant access to a skilled workforce that knows how to build cars to German standards.
But how do the workers feel about this? I mean, going from Volkswagen to Chery, that's quite a change.
That's actually one of the most intriguing parts of this story. The initial reaction was pretty mixed, but there's growing recognition that this might actually secure their long-term employment prospects.
Really? How so?
Well, Chery has made it clear they want to maintain and even expand production. They're essentially offering job security at a time when traditional manufacturers are scaling back their combustion engine operations.
You know what this reminds me of? When Chinese company Geely bought Volvo back in the day. Everyone was skeptical at first, but it turned out pretty well for Volvo.
That's a brilliant comparison, and it's exactly the kind of precedent that's helping to ease concerns. Geely's handling of Volvo showed that Chinese ownership doesn't necessarily mean a complete overhaul of European manufacturing traditions.
But surely this is different. I mean, these are actual German plants, not just a brand acquisition.
You're right, and that's what makes this so unprecedented. This would be the first time a Chinese automaker has taken over existing European production facilities. It's like, imagine if Toyota had bought a Ford plant in Detroit during their rise in the 1980s. It just wouldn't have happened.
So what happens next? I mean, assuming the deal goes through?
Well, that's where things get really fascinating. Chery's planning to use these facilities to produce both electric and hybrid vehicles specifically designed for European markets. They're essentially creating a blueprint for other Chinese manufacturers to follow.
It's like they're not just entering the market, they're becoming part of the local industry.
Exactly. And this is crucial for understanding the broader transformation we're seeing. It's not just about selling cars anymore, it's about becoming embedded in the European automotive ecosystem.
I can see why this would make traditional manufacturers nervous.
It absolutely does. Because this isn't just competition, this is transformation from within. And it's happening at a pace that nobody really expected.
You know what strikes me? How this seems to be a win-win situation. Volkswagen gets to streamline their operations, workers keep their jobs, and Chery gets instant production capacity in Europe.
That's a great observation, and it really shows how the automotive industry is evolving. It's not always about competition. Sometimes it's about finding ways to collaborate and adapt to changing market conditions.
You know, there's another fascinating layer to this transformation that we haven't touched on yet, how Chinese brands are actually winning over European consumers. It's quite remarkable considering how skeptical buyers were just a few years ago.
Yeah, I remember when people would kind of laugh at the idea of Chinese cars. What changed?
Well, they've been incredibly smart about how they've approached the market. Instead of trying to compete head-on with established luxury brands, they started by targeting a really specific segment, tech-savvy buyers who care more about features and innovation than traditional brand prestige.
Sort of like how Tesla did it, starting with people who wanted something different?
Exactly, and here's what's really clever. They're not trying to hide their Chinese origins. Instead, they're positioning themselves as tech companies that happen to make cars.
I've noticed that. Like how NIO has those fancy showrooms that look more like Apple stores than traditional dealerships.
And that's no accident. They've studied how European consumers make purchasing decisions. They know that younger buyers especially are much more interested in connectivity, range, and charging speed than they are in traditional automotive status symbols.
But what about quality concerns? I mean, that's always been the big question mark, hasn't it?
That's where they've been really strategic. Take BYD, for instance. They've actually been inviting European automotive journalists to their factories, showing their quality control processes, their robotics, basically saying, look, we're not just matching European standards, we're exceeding them.
That's pretty bold. Has it worked?
The numbers suggest it has, but here's something even more interesting. They're also tapping into growing environmental consciousness. Many Chinese brands are positioning themselves as pure electric vehicles companies, without any legacy ties to fossil fuels.
Oh, that's clever. So they're turning what could be a weakness, being the new kids on the block, into a strength?
Precisely. And they're backing it up with really innovative features like XPeng's advanced driver assistance systems or BYD's battery technology. They're essentially saying, don't judge us by where we're from, judge us by what we can do.
But surely there must still be some resistance? I mean, changing people's minds about something as significant as their car choice can't be easy.
You're absolutely right. And this is where warranty programs come in. Many Chinese brands are offering significantly longer warranties than traditional manufacturers. It's like they're saying, we're so confident in our quality, we'll guarantee it for longer.
That's putting their money where their mouth is.
Indeed, but there's another fascinating aspect to this. They're also being very careful about their pricing strategy. They're not trying to be the cheapest option. They're positioning themselves as premium products at slightly lower than premium prices.
Sort of like how Japanese brands did it, but faster?
Much faster, and with a crucial difference. While Japanese brands took decades to build their reputation, Chinese manufacturers are leveraging social media, influencer partnerships, and digital marketing to accelerate that process.
I've seen some of those campaigns. They're pretty slick.
They really are. But here's what I find most fascinating. They're creating communities around their brands. NIO, for example, has these things called NIO houses. They're part showroom, part social club, part workspace.
That sounds more like a lifestyle brand than a car company.
That's exactly the point. They're not just selling cars, they're selling a vision of the future. And for many European consumers, especially younger ones, that's incredibly appealing.
You know what's interesting? How different this approach is from what we might have expected even 5 years ago.
Absolutely. Instead of trying to compete on traditional automotive values, they've essentially created their own category. They're not trying to be the next BMW or Mercedes. They're trying to be something entirely new. You know, there's an interesting tension we haven't explored yet, how Europe is trying to balance welcoming Chinese innovation while protecting its own automotive industry. It's creating quite a political and economic puzzle.
I've heard some rumblings about that. Aren't some politicians calling for more trade barriers?
They are, and this is where things get really complex. Some European leaders are suggesting we need stricter regulations specifically for Chinese electric vehicles. But here's the catch. Europe has committed to ambitious climate goals that actually depend on making electric vehicles more accessible.
Oh, so they're caught between protecting their industry and meeting their environmental targets?
Exactly. And it gets even more complicated. European consumers are voting with their wallets, choosing these more affordable Chinese electric vehicles. Any attempt to restrict that choice through tariffs or regulations could actually slow down the transition to electric vehicles.
Isn't there also something about subsidies? I remember reading about concerns that Chinese manufacturers get unfair government support.
That's a great point. The argument is that Chinese manufacturers benefit from significant state support, which helps them offer competitive prices. But here's where it gets interesting. Many European manufacturers have also received substantial government support for their electric vehicle programs.
So it's kind of like everyone's doing it, but pointing fingers at each other?
Pretty much. And there's another fascinating layer to this. The European auto industry is deeply integrated with Chinese supply chains, especially for batteries and electronics. Any protectionist measures could actually hurt European manufacturers too.
That sounds like a real catch-22 situation.
It absolutely is, and some industry experts are suggesting that protectionism might actually be counterproductive. They argue that competition from Chinese manufacturers could push European companies to innovate faster and become more competitive.
But what about jobs? That's got to be a big concern for politicians.
Absolutely, and this is where the debate gets really heated. Traditional auto manufacturing employs hundreds of thousands of Europeans, but there's growing evidence that Chinese investment, like that potential Volkswagen plant acquisition we discussed, might actually help preserve some of those jobs.
So it's not as simple as just protecting European industry versus letting Chinese companies in?
Not at all. Take the issue of technology transfer. While some worry about European expertise flowing to Chinese companies, others point out that Chinese investment brings new technologies and manufacturing methods to Europe.
That's interesting. So it's more about finding the right balance?
Exactly. And some regions are handling this better than others. Norway, for instance, has embraced Chinese electric vehicles while simultaneously developing its own electric vehicle ecosystem.
Could that be a model for the rest of Europe?
It's certainly being looked at closely, but here's what makes this whole situation so fascinating. We're watching the rules of global trade being rewritten in real time. The old playbook for protecting domestic industries just doesn't work in today's interconnected world.
You know what strikes me? How this seems less about cars and more about the future of industrial policy itself.
That's such an insightful observation. We're really seeing a clash between 20th century industrial policy and 21st century market realities. The challenge isn't just about protecting markets anymore. It's about adapting to a completely new industrial landscape.
And I guess the longer Europe takes to figure this out, the more ground they might lose in the electric vehicle race?
That's exactly the concern. While policymakers debate protectionist measures, Chinese manufacturers continue to innovate and gain market share. It's like trying to build a wall while the other side is building bridges.
Sounds like Europe needs to find a middle ground, and fast.
Indeed. And that might mean accepting that the future of European automotive manufacturing looks very different from its past. The question isn't whether change is coming, it's how to manage that change in a way that benefits everyone.
You know, when we started this conversation, we were talking about spotting Chinese cars on German streets. But what we've uncovered is really a story about how quickly entire industries can transform.
It's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. We're not just seeing new brands enter the market, we're watching the whole automotive landscape being reshaped.
And that's what makes this moment so significant. The combination of electric vehicle technology, changing consumer preferences, and Chinese manufacturing expertise has created this perfect storm of transformation.
I keep thinking about those Volkswagen plants potentially becoming cherry facilities. That really symbolizes the whole shift, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. But you know what's most fascinating? This isn't just about cars anymore. It's about how global industries adapt to massive change. The automotive sector might just be the beginning.
So what you're saying is, this could be a blueprint for how other industries might transform.
Exactly. And while some see this as a challenge to European industry, others view it as an opportunity for evolution. The real question isn't whether Chinese manufacturers will succeed in Europe. It's how this transformation will reshape global manufacturing.
Sounds like we're watching industrial history being made.
We really are. And perhaps that's the biggest takeaway. In today's interconnected world, success isn't about protecting what you have. It's about embracing change and finding ways to grow through it.
Thanks for listening. If you liked, don't forget to share it with your friends. See you next time.